It started just after sunset, that quiet hour when the lake turns into glass, the wind slows down, and everything feels like it's holding its breath. I was standing on the wooden deck of my lakefront ranch, watching the last strip of orange light fade behind the hills. The water reflected the sky like it didn't want the day to end. Peaceful. Too peaceful. That's usually how problems begin. My phone buzzed. Once. Then again. Then a third time in rapid succession. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know something was wrong. But I did anyway. HOA notice. Property compliance inspection. Immediate access required. I frowned. Immediate access. That was a new one. I had owned this ranch long enough to know how HOAs worked. Slow letters, vague threats, passive-aggressive reminders about fences, paint colors, mailbox placement. Not immediate access. Not like this. Then another notification popped up. HOA security team en route to property. That made me stop walking completely. Security team? HOAs didn't have security teams. They had bylaws and emails. At least, they were supposed to. I stepped off the deck and walked toward the gravel path leading to the main gate. The ranch stretched wide in every direction. Open land, fence boundaries, a long private road leading down to the lake. No neighbors close enough to see anything clearly. No traffic unless you counted the occasional maintenance truck or delivery driver who always got lost the first time. And tonight, there were headlights, far out on the main access road. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, too fast for a routine inspection. I stopped at the gate control panel, looked at the camera feed, and there they were, 3 black SUVs, pulling in like they owned the place. I didn't open the gate, didn't step back, didn't call out. I just watched, because something about the way they arrived told me this wasn't about rules. This was about pressure, control, intimidation, the kind of thing people try when they think you won't push back. The first vehicle stopped right outside the gate, second right behind it, third angled slightly off to the side like they were planning something more than just a conversation. Doors opened, and out stepped 4 people, not uniformed police, not county officials. Private security, dark jackets, earpieces, flashlights already in hand like they expected resistance. One of them stepped forward first, confident, straight posture, like he was used to being listened to without question. He tapped something on a tablet and looked up at me. "You the property owner?" he called out. I didn't answer right away, just studied him. Then I said, "You're trespassing." A pause, like he wasn't used to that response. Then he smiled slightly. "From the HOA Authorized Compliance Inspection." That name again. The HOA. Of course. I stepped closer to the gate but didn't open it. "This is private property," I said. "There is no scheduled inspection." He tilted his head. "Doesn't matter. We've been instructed to ensure access." I let that sit for a second. Then I asked, "Instructed by who?" He looked down at the tablet again. Then back up, HOA board directive. That's when I understood what this really was. Not inspection, not compliance. Pressure. They weren't checking anything. They were trying to force entry. Behind him, one of the other security guys shifted slightly. Not aggressive, not loud, but positioned, like they were preparing for the gate to open whether I agreed or not. I pressed the intercom button. "My name is on the deed to this property," I said calmly. "You do not have permission to enter. Leave now." A pause. Then the lead guy sighed. Don't make this difficult." That sentence, I've heard it before. It usually means someone already decided what they're going to do, and they are just informing you out of politeness. I stepped back slightly, not because I was intimidated, because I was already calculating. Distances, angles, vehicles, response time, and more importantly, authority. "I'm giving you one warning," I said. "Turn around and leave." The lead security guy exchanged a look with the others. Then he chuckled. "We're not here to argue." And he stepped toward the gate control box. That was the moment everything shifted. Because he thought this was just a gate, just a property, just another HOA homeowner who would eventually comply. He was wrong. I reached into my pocket, not for a weapon, not for anything dramatic, for my phone, and opened a single folder. Property registry, full legal documentation, county-certified boundary confirmation, and one additional detail they clearly hadn't checked. This ranch wasn't just private property. It was part of a protected lakefront zoning district with restricted enforcement jurisdiction, meaning no HOA security, no forced entry, no exceptions. I stepped forward again, held my phone up just enough for them to see. "You're not authorized to be here," I said again, slower this time. "If you step past that gate, you'll be trespassing on protected property." The lead guy paused, just for a moment, long enough for doubt to appear. Then he said something under his breath into his earpiece. A quick response came back. I couldn't hear it, but I saw his face change. Subtle, but enough. He looked at the gate, then at me, then at the others behind him, and suddenly, the confidence wasn't so strong anymore, because whatever he just heard wasn't what he expected, and for the first time since they arrived, they weren't sure if they were the ones in control. The lead security guy didn't move right away. That pause said everything. Not hesitation out of politeness. Hesitation out of uncertainty. He stepped slightly back from the gate control box, eyes narrowing at my phone like he was trying to decide whether I was bluffing. Behind him, the other security personnel shifted their weight. Not aggressive, but no longer confident either. Because something about the way I said it, calm, direct, certain, had changed the atmosphere. It wasn't a standoff anymore. It was a calculation. He tapped his earpiece again. "Confirmed jurisdiction status," he said quietly. A pause followed. Longer this time. I didn't interrupt it. Didn't rush them. I just stood there, letting the silence do its work. The lake behind me stayed still, reflecting the fading light like nothing in the world was happening. But everything was happening. Right here. Right now. Finally, he spoke again. But this time his voice wasn't as firm. "HOA says access is authorized under Emergency Compliance Clause." I almost smiled. Almost. Because I'd already read their playbook. And that clause? It wasn't what they thought it was. I took one step forward. Not toward them. Just closer to the gate. "So let me be clear," I said. "You're relying on an HOA clause to override county property law on a private lakefront estate." No answer. That silence again. Because now they were thinking. Really thinking. I continued. "That gate is on my deeded land. The road you're standing on is privately maintained under easement restrictions, and your security authorization does not supersede state property statutes." The lead guy frowned. Not because he didn't understand. Because he did. Behind him, one of the other security members leaned slightly closer. "You said this was routine," he muttered. Not to me. To him. That's when I knew the internal shift had started. The lead guy raised a hand. "Stand by." Then he turned slightly away, speaking into his radio again. This time longer, more serious, less confident. I didn't interrupt, because I didn't need to. The situation was already doing what it always does when people overstep. It was correcting itself. Slowly, uneasily. A minute passed, then another. Finally, he looked back up, and this time, his tone had changed completely. "We need clarification from HOA legal." I nodded once. "That's a good idea." And that's when I did something they weren't expecting. I didn't argue, didn't escalate, didn't resist. I simply walked over to the gate panel and placed my hand near the biometric reader. Not to open it, just to show them something. "Before you proceed any further," I said, "you should understand one thing." They all watched me now, waiting. "This property isn't just owned," I continued. "It's structured under a multi-layer legal trust with direct county oversight. Any unauthorized entry doesn't trigger HOA enforcement." I paused, let it land, then finished. "It triggers liability." That word changed the air instantly. Liability. Not rules. Not warnings. Consequences. The lead security guy straightened slightly. "Are you threatening legal action?" I shook my head once. "No," I said calmly. "I'm explaining what already exists." A beat of silence. Then something unexpected happened. One of the security members stepped back. Then another. Not leaving, but reassessing. Because security teams don't get trained for this kind of situation. They get trained for fences, gates, intrusions, not layered property law structures backed by county enforcement. The lead guy looked toward the vehicles, then back at me, and for the first time, he wasn't trying to push forward. He was trying to figure out how to leave without making it worse. Then his radio crackled again. This time, louder, urgent, abort compliance entry, confirm legal override in effect. A pause, then his face changed. Completely. He lowered the radio slowly, looked at the gate, then at me, and said something very different from before. We're stepping back. No argument, no negotiation, just execution of instruction. The security team began retreating toward their vehicles. Not rushed, not chaotic, controlled, but the shift was undeniable. They had come expecting authority. They were leaving with none. The lead guy paused before getting into his SUV, looked back at me, long enough to acknowledge what just happened. Then he said, "This isn't over with the HOA." I nodded slightly. "I know." And as they drove away down the lake road, the dust settling behind them, I stayed standing at the gate, still, quiet, unmoved, because this wasn't the end of anything. It was just the moment the situation changed direction. And somewhere back in that HOA boardroom, someone had just realized they didn't send security to enforce rules. They sent them into a legal structure they didn't understand. The sound of the last SUV fading down the lake road should have felt like victory, but it didn't. It felt like the calm right before a second wave. Because people like that don't just leave empty-handed. They leave reporting back. And I knew exactly what was coming next. I walked back from the gate slowly. The lake was still glowing faintly under the fading sky, but everything about the property felt different now. Not unsafe, not threatened, just exposed, like a line had been drawn in the date, and someone on the other side was about to redraw it. My phone buzzed again, this time not an alert. A call, unknown number. I already knew who it was before I answered. "Mr. Hayes," a voice said. "Not the HOA. Legal. That tone is always different. Careful. Measured. Like every word is being recorded internally before it's spoken." "Yes," I replied. A pause. Then, "I represent the HOA board regarding tonight's incident involving private security engagement." I didn't interrupt. Let him continue. That's usually when people reveal the most. There appears to be a dispute regarding property access authority and enforcement jurisdiction. I almost smiled again. "Appears," I repeated quietly. Another pause. Then the shift came. "We would like to resolve this matter before it escalates further." There it was. The pivot. Not confidence anymore. Containment. I walked up onto the deck while still on the call. "Let me save us time," I said. "Your security team attempted entry onto private, deeded land without valid legal authority. That's not a dispute. That's a liability exposure." Silence on the line. Longer this time. When he spoke again, the tone had changed. "Careful now. HOA enforcement believed they were acting within contractual rights granted under the community covenant." I stopped walking, because that was the argument they were going to rely on, and I had already dismantled it. "Then your covenant is being interpreted outside its legal boundary," I said, "because it does not override state property statutes or county jurisdictional limits." Another silence, this one heavier. "You're an attorney?" he asked finally. I didn't answer immediately, because that question changed the entire tone of the conversation. "Yes," I said simply, and that's when everything on the line went quiet. Not surprised quiet, not confused quiet, recognizing quiet, because now they understood what they were dealing with was an emotional homeowner reacting to an HOA overreach. It was structure versus structure, law versus assumption. And assumption was already losing. "We will need to review all documentation before proceeding further," he said finally. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. That's a correct next step. And then I ended the call. Not abruptly, not angrily, just cleanly. The kind of ending lawyers make when the conversation is already over. Inside the house, I opened my office cabinet. I hadn't touched most of those files in years, but I knew exactly where everything was. Property filings, trust documentation, county filings, recorded easements, everything they assumed they could override with a security directive. I laid it all out on the desk, not because I needed to prepare a defense, but because I was preparing the response. Because here's the thing most people don't understand about HOAs. They only have power until someone forces them to prove it, and most of the time, nobody ever does. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from the HOA board, not legal, internal, urgent board meeting scheduled tonight. I stared at the message for a second, then set the phone down, because that wasn't an escalation. That was a reaction, and reactions happen when control starts slipping. I looked out toward the lake again, calm, still, quiet, and I realized something important. They didn't send security to enforce rules. They sent them to test resistance. And they just found out resistance wasn't the problem. Understanding was. Because now they knew this wasn't a homeowner they could pressure. This wasn't a situation they could contain. And it definitely wasn't something they could intimidate into silence. This was going to court level, whether they were ready or not. And for the first time since all this started, the HOA wasn't leading the situation anymore. They were chasing it. The emergency HOA meeting wasn't optional. That was the language they used. But in reality, it meant something else. It meant we are losing control and we need witnesses to our response. I arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late, because timing matters in rooms like that. If you show up too early, you look anxious. If you show up too late, you look guilty. But if you show up exactly on time, you look intentional. The community hall was already packed. Residents I recognized, some avoiding eye contact, some whispering, some watching me like they were trying to place me in a story they'd already been told. That's how HOAs work. Narratives before facts. Opinions before truth. At the front of the room sat the board. And for the first time since this started, they didn't look confident. They looked tired. That's always the first stage of collapse in organizations like this. Not anger, not fear, fatigue. The board president cleared his throat. Let's come to order. No energy behind it, just structure trying to hold itself together. Then he looked at me, and everything paused for half a second too long, because everyone in that room knew I wasn't there as a passive participant anymore. I was the variable they couldn't control. We are here regarding recent events involving external enforcement contractors, he said carefully. Notice the wording. Not security team. Not HOA action. External enforcement contractors. Distance language. That's how institutions protect themselves. A hand went up in the audience before he could continue. No one told us they were sending security onto private property. Murmurs spread immediately. That was the crack. Small, but visible. The board member tried to respond quickly. It was a compliance escalation under covenant authority. Another interruption. Did they have legal permission? Silence. That's a dangerous kind of silence in a public meeting, because silence answers things words can't defend. Then someone else spoke. And why did they leave so quickly? That question hit harder than the first, because now people weren't just confused. They were suspicious. The board turned slightly toward me, not aggressively, carefully, like they were hoping I wouldn't speak. But I did. Not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. I told them they were operating outside jurisdictional authority. I said, that was it. No drama. Just fact. A ripple went through the room. Because people don't react to emotion in these rooms. They react to clarity. The board president straightened slightly. Mr. Hayes, we are not here to debate legal interpretations. I raised my hand, politely, interrupting without raising my voice. That's always more powerful than shouting. This isn't interpretation, I said. It's property law. Pause. Then I continued, and it's already documented. I placed a folder on the table in front of me, not aggressively, not dramatically, just deliberately. The sound it made was quiet, but the room reacted like it was loud, because everyone understood what that gesture meant. Evidence. The board didn't touch it immediately. That hesitation said everything. Finally, the president opened it. Read the first page, then the second, then stopped, because what they were looking at was an emotional argument. It was structure, deeds, county filings, boundary certification, legal jurisdiction breakdowns, and the deeper they read, the quieter the room became. Someone from the audience spoke again. So, they weren't allowed on his property. No one from the board answered immediately, because now answering meant responsibility. And responsibility is where HOA power usually ends. Finally, one board member spoke. We may have exceeded operational boundaries during enforcement interpretation. That's corporate language for, we messed up. The room reacted instantly, not loudly, but collectively. The shift was happening now, because once residents realize the HOA is not fully in control, they stop accepting everything it says at face value. The president leaned forward slightly. This matter will be reviewed internally. But his voice didn't carry authority anymore. It carried damage control. And that's when the final shift happened. Someone in the back stood up. I want to know why we were never told there could be legal consequences for this. Another voice followed. And who approved sending security? Then another. Are we liable for this? That last question changed the room completely. Because liability isn't abstract. It's financial. It's real. It's personal. The board realized it at the same moment I did. They weren't just losing authority. They were about to inherit consequences. The president looked at me again, this time differently, less like a neighbor, more like a problem they couldn't ignore anymore. We may need to discuss a settlement approach, he said carefully. I nodded slightly. Now you're speaking my language. But I didn't smile, because this wasn't over yet. Not even close. As the meeting dissolved into side conversations and rising tension, I stayed seated, watching, listening, because now I understood something clearly. The HOA wasn't trying to win anymore. They were trying to survive the fallout of what they had already done. And survival mode? That's when people make their biggest mistakes. I stood up slowly, collected my folder, and as I walked out of the hall, I could feel every eye on me. Not hostile, not friendly, just aware. Because now they all knew the same thing. This wasn't a simple HOA dispute anymore. The call came the next morning, not from the HOA board, from their attorney, and the tone was completely different now. No confidence, no pressure, just careful negotiation. We'd like to discuss a resolution, he said. I stayed silent for a moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I already knew what had changed. They weren't leading anymore. They were reacting. Go ahead, I replied. A pause. Then he continued. There is concern within the board about exposure related to the enforcement action taken against your property. Translation. They understood liability now. Fully. I walked toward the window while listening. Outside, the lake was calm again, like nothing had ever happened. But that wasn't true. Everything had changed. Just not visibly anymore. They are willing to consider withdrawal of all enforcement actions, he added, and termination of any pending violations, provided we can avoid further escalation. I almost smiled. Provided, I repeated. That word always shows up when leverage shifts. Yes, he said carefully. I nodded slowly. Here's the problem, I replied. You're not negotiating a violation dispute anymore. Silence. Because he already knew what I was going to say next. This is now a documented overreach involving an authorized private property enforcement, security deployment, and jurisdictional misrepresentation. Another pause, longer this time. Then he asked a question that confirmed everything. What would resolve this for you? That's the moment everything becomes real in cases like this. Not anger, not revenge, just structure. I turned back toward my desk. Looked at the file still sitting there, everything I had prepared, everything they had triggered, and I answered simply. Accountability, formal withdrawal of all claims, written acknowledgement of jurisdictional overreach, and revision of enforcement authority boundaries. No emotion, just terms. He exhaled slightly on the other end. That will require board approval. I know, I said, and I meant it, because now they had to convince each other. Not me. The call ended shortly after, and for the first time in days, it was quiet, real quiet. Section 6, Aftermath. 3 days later, it was over, officially. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The HOA issued a formal statement. All enforcement actions against my property were withdrawn, pending violations dismissed, security engagement policies suspended for review, and most importantly, a written acknowledgement that jurisdictional authority had been exceeded. That was the part that mattered most. Not because of pride, because of precedent. The board didn't collapse, but it changed. Meetings became more careful, rules became more documented, and enforcement became something they thought about twice before acting. As for the neighborhood, that changed too. Not overnight, but gradually. People started asking questions before accepting notices, started checking boundaries before assuming authority, started realizing something most never do. HOA power only works when no one challenges it. One evening, I stood on the dock again. Same lake, same sunset, but a different feeling. Not tension anymore, just clarity. My phone buzzed one last time. A final HOA notification, just a generic update. No urgency, no demands, just silence between the lines. I didn't even open it immediately, because I already understood something important now. You don't win situations like this by reacting louder. You win them by being correct when it matters most. I put the phone down, watched the water, and let the day end the way it should have started. Quiet, controlled, mine.